All right. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Sapp. Before we get started, can you give a quick overview of your role in the environment that you're responsible for securing?
Yeah, hi there. Thanks for having me today. My name is Dean Sapp. I'm the Chief Information Security Nerd Officer at Filevine. I'll also functioning as the Data Protection Officer, and we are a legal case management, matter management, knowledge management system with a new buzzword, LOIS, which is our AI legal operating system. So we're running a very diverse cloud, 100% cloud-based infrastructure, and we love all of the clouds.
Okay. So how is being a CISO in SaaS different from other industries?
Well, I would say in SaaS in the last 3 months, it's drastically changed. With Anthropic's Mythos model, and then with the project Glasswing, and then the open source project Clearwing, we're seeing an evolution of AI-based attacks against SaaS platforms that are pretty much unprecedented. And yesterday, Chat GPT 5.5 dropped, and according to the AI Security Institute, it was one of only two models that have ever completed their virtual red teaming type exercise and chaining all of these vulnerabilities together to be able to exploit and win. So the only two models that have completed the exercise were Mythos and now GPT 5.5. So it really is changing the landscape for SaaS platforms, changing the landscape for CISOs. And we're getting to the point now where you cannot release code that has known critical or high or even moderate level vulnerabilities, because if you release them into production, the time to exploit is now shrunk to minutes. So it's drastically heightened the awareness of vulnerabilities and vulnerability management programs for uh, security practitioners and CISOs alike.
Okay, so when it comes to AI, both using it and the threat of it, how do you manage that as a software company?
Well, we have been fully immersed in AI for over 3 years, and we've built AI into all of our products. The only way to do that safely, in my opinion, and this has been the model we have followed, is that we have a zero retention, zero storage agreement with all of the LLM providers that we use. And we
Mhm.
have accounts with all of the big ones, because we realize that for AI to be effective, it often has to be very purpose built. And let's be honest, some of the AIs are good at some things and not other things.
Right.
So we have built an AI MCP router layer that allows us to basically hot swap LLMs depending on their performance, depending on if they're not even available. I think anyone who's been using AI the last year knows that these models go offline occasionally. Might be
Mhm.
10 milliseconds, it might be 10 minutes, it might be an hour, who knows. So being able to build in the tooling so that you can leverage the models, again, where they are not training on client data, that they
Right.
are simply just allowed to process vectorized data. So we don't allow the models to store our customers' data or to retain it, but we do want to know how the data can be, effectively used to answer a question. Like, what was the summary judgment for the last case of this type, or help me write a new demand letter that is very similar to these 50 demand letters we've written in the last few years, or even taking a deposition, because a deposition in real time, for an AI to analyze it, can help you find flaws in the arguments or contradictions or impeachment by the witness. So it's really a game-changing technology. And then my security team is likewise using the same technology, like Clearwing, to help us predict and to find our own vulnerabilities or
Right.
attack patterns. So we're building in AI into all of our tooling, our SOC, and we've built some agentic agents that help us to detect things and patterns that would have taken quite a bit longer for the SOC to
Mhm.
find, and now they can simply they're orchestrating the incident response efforts and resolution based off of the findings.
Okay, very interesting. So as a software company, as you're building your product, obviously you just said you're using AI in some of the security aspect of that. Um, what are some other ways that you integrate security into the development process without slowing your engineers down?
Yeah, that's a great question. And naturally, there's a little bit of tension that is going to
Right, of
occur.
course.
But by leveraging coding agents, there's the cursors and the Claude
Hmm.
codes and the code rabbits of the world. These different agents do help the developers to code more quickly. But it's important that we teach the developers to include in their prompting to abide by OWASP top 10
Hmm.
principles, both for software development as well as just AI coding AI principles for secure efforts. So teaching the developers to code the whole shift left idea, the sooner that
Hmm.
you find the flaws in the code base, and as soon as they're written, many of these coding tools will give feedback to the developer. Hey, there's a flaw in this
Hmm.
library, or that method you just created has a cross-site scripting vulnerability in it, or you're using libraries that are not anti cross-site scripting by default. There's just a
Hmm.
lot of things that can be built in to these agents, and some of these, cursor is a completely different replacement for the developer experience versus having something built in to other coding platforms. So just understanding what the developers need to use, and then building the appropriate guardrails around those, and then, of course, traditional peer review of code, scanning with SaaS and DAS tools,
Right.
and now AI enabled scanning tools so that you
Hmm.
can find the issues before the bad actors.
So, have you been able to use AI not just in the identification of the vulnerabilities, but actually helping with some of the remediations at all? I know that's something that some people are doing. Not everyone's comfortable with it quite yet, but I'm curious if that's something you've been able to use agents for.
Definitely. Well, Opus 4.6 and some of these other library LLMs are quite good at not only discovering the weaknesses, but helping you to fix them. So one of the strengths of Mythos is its ability to refactor code. I was
Hmm.
recently made aware of a situation where there were some developers that wanted to rewrite the Linux kernel and get rid of years and years of vulnerabilities that Mythos identified. And Mythos was actually able to help some developers rewrite the kernel in Rust in just a few days, and for it to be stable and far more secure. So you're going to start to see additional uses of these AI tools. And again, Mythos and Glasswing, they were ultimately written to be development tools, help you
Hmm.
write really good code. And then they also happen to be very, very good at vulnerability chaining, like we talked about earlier. So by understanding the weaknesses, understanding the code dependencies in the libraries, they do help you refactor. And one of my senior AppSec engineers, we had a project that was like running on I think it was like .NET 5 or 6, and quite a bit older version, and they were able to bring it up to .NET 10 for this one particular app in just a matter of days, having it look at the current code, understand and training it on or teaching it through prompting what the
Hmm.
application did, and then having a senior dev who understands those dependencies where things may not be quite right that the
Right.
LLM produces, and then fixing it. He was able to get it operational in, again, less than a week. And the development estimates before that, where it would probably take 4 to 6 weeks to rewrite it.
Wow.
So it's quite a bit of a full force multiplier. And of course, in the hands of a skilled developer who knows the constraints and the security requirements,
Right.
it's quite effective.
Yeah, I can imagine. So in addition to having a human in the loop to do the quality assurance on those remediations, are there any other guardrails that are important for organizations to put in place to make sure that when AI is being used to conduct remediations, that they're not, doing anything incorrectly or that could harm the organization?
Well, I would say, first of all, when you're using these AI coding tools to help you, you need to make sure that they are set up securely, right?
Hmm.
Cursor out of the box has zero privacy and zero security. You have to go turn those on so that you own the code secrets
Hmm.
that are in the code that you're allowing the AI tool to build with. So it's very important that you have enterprise agreements and then you train your developers on how to set these settings up properly, where privacy is turned on by default, security is turned on by default, and so that gives you a place to start, and then you go through this. I would say some of the traditional processes where you
Hmm.
still have a second person review that code. You obviously run it through all of your QA and test harnesses and leveraging AI to write better test cases and
Hmm.
the ability to discover vulnerabilities of certain types. Like one of the things that's come up quite a bit recently with AI is a token exhaustion. Anytime that you have a function and it's leveraging or using too many of your AI tokens, you're essentially burning money. And being able to identify those resource exhaustion findings and to secure them is really, really important. And we've also found we an agentic bot that looked at all of our deployments and failures tied to like error codes, 500 errors or 403s or other errors showing either unauthorized access or some type of failure. And then we were able to tie those back to the deployments and to the actual root cause. And so we
Hmm.
now have agents that go through those logs and see in near real time what is failing. And then they can tell the SREs exactly where to go. This particular resource has tipped over or is no longer
Hmm.
responsive or is the millisecond delays are unacceptable thresholds. So really it's helping us to get laser focused on where the flaws are in the build pipeline or in
Hmm.
the stack, and then to address them quite quickly.
Okay, wow, that's very interesting. So shifting a little bit, I know one kind of problem that many organizations come up with when it comes to cybersecurity is the impulse to buy tools first rather than implementing process improvements. What are some areas that you would say, specifically in software companies, software as a service companies, that most organizations that process things that they do incorrectly and they try to bring a tool set in to do that when they need to make a process change first?
Yeah, there's a balance between process and automation and tooling. And I'd say the first thing, if you don't have people who are or with the skills previous to buying the tool
Mhm.
to use it, it doesn't matter how great the tool is. You're going to either have to train the employees or you're
Right.
going to have to hire people that know how to do it. Because even if you've hired pro services to set it up,
Right.
once that agreement's gone, they typically are not available as frequently as needed, and then
Hmm.
you have a tool that's suboptimal. I typically tell firms that I've worked with and for we should leverage what we already have bought and
Right.
figure out how to get the most out of it we can.
Hmm.
And again, that's either training someone or
Right.
hiring someone with the skills. And only after we've exhausted those two options would I consider replacing the tool.
Hmm.
But again, if you'd asked me that question 6 months ago, what I just shared with you is my standard answer. Now, I would say if you have a very good data science team or security experts who understand LLMs and bots well, you can probably write a more efficient way to do this yourself in
Hmm.
in days. And so we have been leaning very heavy into automating the most common items we handle for incidents and for log flags and events and alerts, and just building that ourselves because we can iterate so quickly, much faster than I think a lot of the tooling folks can, because our LLMs understand our infrastructure. They understand and have access to the code bases that we've given them access to. And they understand our vulnerability posture because they can see
Hmm.
our observability platform and logging and user access. So by giving them access to our internal systems, and then we write the code to stitch it together, and it's just been absolutely remarkable speed lately.
Okay. So would you say, it kind of sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're talking about using AI internally to either maybe not replace tool sets, but do not have to buy new ones. Are there any particular types of tools or a category of vendors that you think is most at risk from organizations choosing to do that? I'm curious to see if there's a like a number one probably won't exist in 10 years category for you.
Well, I actually believe that managed SOC as a service could be seriously hindered because
Mhm.
you can now write tailor-made SOC analyst bots that
Mhm.
are doing pretty much everything your tier ones and tier twos are doing, and then you would just need the expertise on like a tier three or above to handle the resolution and notification and working with legal, and if necessary working with the compliance team, some of the more sophisticated knowledge base work that is not strictly just identifying outliers and flaws. And again,
Right.
maybe a lot of these managed SOC providers will get better as well, and maybe there's
Right.
still a play for that. But I think it's going to supplant a lot of the intern and tier one
Right.
kind of
Right.
work, and that's going to be good for all.
Yeah. So, speaking of cybersecurity vendors, where would you say they most go wrong? They most misunderstand, software as a service, environments, companies. In your experience, what separates a vendor you trust versus a vendor you don't?
Well, that's kind of I'll say that's a deeper question. Um, for me, vendors that I have good relationships with are vendors that I have good relationships with. I mean,
Right.
they're constantly uh, reaching out, asking
Hmm.
for recommendations for enhancements, and we
Hmm.
have an interactive relationship where they actually take the feedback and then they apply it. They build a solution to get it into the roadmap. I've got a few vendors that we're working with, like our orchestration platform, and they are super responsive, and they know that we're doing some pretty hard things with FedRAMP. Like we just
Hmm.
received our FedRAMP moderate authorization.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah,
That's
20.
very difficult.
It is. We got 20x moderate authorized yesterday. And so it's been a long process. But one our orchestration platform, we said, look, we want you guys to come along with us and help build the queries and help build the
Mhm.
dashboards and things that we can show as evidence, and then make that all available through your API. Because for 20x, that program for FedRAMP, you have to send your computer readable and human readable data to the FedRAMP PMO weekly. It's not like a POAM where you do it once a month. They want to see evidence weekly to
Wow.
know that your security program is effective. Well, the only way to do that at scale when you've got billions of events coming in every day is to have an orchestration tier, an
Mhm.
observability tier, and all the automations so that that happens organically. And so that's one of the things I would say is if you have a vendor that listens to your business needs and,
Mhm.
of course, understands that it applies not just to you, but to any of their customers that have similar requirements, and then takes action. So we've stayed with our orchestration vendor. They were our third one, but now that we found one that they're very, I would say, very hungry and willing to build the things we need, and then they see the vision of why it will help other customers and help them generate additional revenue.
Okay, that sounds like a perfect answer. We know basically what our relationship with clients. If you have an engaged client and you're talking to them, making changes, they're more likely to stay, as opposed to, if you're not communicating, you're not working with them, then they don't see the value. So that makes sense from our side as a vendor as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I would say, just to add to that, you don't want the only time you hear from your vendor to be
to be the
when
renewal.
your
Yeah.
renewal's up. That's a really bad model that you
Yeah.
know is going to terminate the relationship.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. So I think that covers kind of all the bases that I had in my list. As a final question, if you joined a new software as a service company tomorrow, what is the first thing you would probably look to change?
Well, I would say before I make any changes, I do essentially a risk assessment of the
Mhm.
environment to understand where they stand and what data they're processing, who has access to it, where it lives, all the clouds, understand the technology stack that they have, and then the skill set. What do the employees that are running the tooling, what are their strengths and their weaknesses? And then once I understand that, then I go to the top of the list. What is the application or the service that's generating the most money, the most revenue for the business? And then what are the gaps or the risks for that particular product? Because you always want to take a risk-based approach, and
Mhm.
that should be tied to revenue because that's what the business generates. And
Right.
if they're not generating revenue, or if the most valuable asset gets compromised, your company just took a tremendous hit, both reputationally and financially. So it's going to be all proportional to what we discover and what's going to provide the most bang for the buck.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me. Take care, Sullivan.